Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Izuku has ancient quirk, part 2, subscribe if you enjoy the video, let's begin the story. He lets her get his banana in her hands, and watches her nostrils flare, as she drinks in his quirk enhanced musk, and then he stops her with a shake of his head, and a smile. Well, I really appreciate the thought, we should actually get back, time is ticking, and I don't think either of us wants to miss out on the other half of our exam. Blinking owlishly, Momo looks taken aback, even, as Izuku gently takes his obviously throbbing shaft out of her hands, and tucks it back in. When he offers her a hand to help her up off of her knees, she takes it but still looks absolutely baffled, eyes darting between his face and his crotch. Are you sure? You just helped me relax so much. The least I could do is. Placing a finger against her lips, Izuku cuts her off with a cheesy, somewhat cheeky smile. Hey, this was never a transaction. Honestly, we moved really fast there. I'm just glad I didn't scare you away, Momo. I want us to be friends, and I'm sure there will be more opportunities for us to hang out going forward, yeah. But that, he knows he has her. In fact, he can tell that she almost has to hold herself back from opening her mouth and taking his finger past her lips right then and there. Such a confident, self-assured young woman, but not when it came to this sort of thing. Not when it came to sex. He just rocked her world with his tongue, and now he wasn't even giving her a chance to reciprocate. As he pulls his finger away from her lips, she almost seems to subconsciously lean forward before catching herself. Blushing and stuttering in an uncharacteristic manner, the gorgeous heiress shifts from foot to foot and eventually nods. Yeah. I'd like that a lot. Izuku just grins and then offers her his hand again, something she takes. With their fingers intertwined, they walk together towards the field where the physical section of the recommendation entrance exam would be held. If Momo wonders how he knows where to go without asking anyone first, she doesn't bring it up. Instead, she lets him hold her hand all the way there, only pulling away when they get in view of other people. Izuku doesn't hold it against her though. He's definitely made inroads with a gorgeous young woman, that's for sure. At the end of the day, that was really all he wanted. This was the start of his career as a pro hero, after all. Even if he wasn't even a student at UA. Yet, it didn't really matter. He was all but guaranteed to become one, at which point he would be well on his way to achieving his goals. They're not the first ones to the field, most likely on account of what they'd been doing together, but they are still relatively early. Early enough that he could definitely have gotten a blowjob from Momo and still showed up on time if he wanted to. But this was fine too. Izuku takes in those that got there before the two of them and sees Shadow Todoroki and Satsuna Tokage among them. The rest, along with Amplifier, all show up soon after, and once they're all there, Amplifier speaks up from the front. Alright kids, gather around. It's time for the practical exam. Once she's sure that she has everyone's attention, Amplifier continues on, a big smile on her cute young face. The way this will work is simple. You've all given numbers at this point in time. The physical part of the test will be a race between 6 of you at a time along a 3-kilometer long obstacle course. Quirk use is not only allowed but definitely encouraged. We want to see the best of the best do your best, so don't hold back even a little. Izuku can see the way Amplifier's words and her choice use of her quirk, yell, are pumping up the others. For him personally though, he knows he has to be careful here. Not too careful but careful enough. If he used everything he had, well, this would be a cakewalk. But it would also raise even more questions than had already been raised. He had a plan for the eventuality that his ability to hoard and use multiple quirks like his father was discovered. He would feign ignorance and claim that when he killed All for One, he hadn't understood what was happening, but that it made sense since he'd been feeling a lot more powerful. There was no reason to pull out that excuse too early, however. Right now, he could pass off plenty of his quirks as simply parts of One for All, while at the same time using some of his other more subtle quirks for social engineering and seduction purposes, as he had with Momoyaoi Rozu. And so, as Izuku lines up alongside 5 of the other student hopefuls and gets ready to race, he's very much not planning on doing his best. That doesn't mean he doesn't want to excel, however. In his group of 6 are both Momo and Satsuna, as well as 3 young men that he doesn't know or recognize off of the top of his head. He doesn't need to recognize them to know their quirks though, and what he sees there's some strength among them. After all, both Satsuna and Momo's quirks are very powerful in their own right. But nothing that Izuku is all that worried about. Once they're all in position, Amplifier steps forward and brings a whistle to her lips. Alright everyone. On my mark. Ready. Set. Go. But the use of her quirk combined with a sharp tweet from the whistle, the 6 of them are off. It's not a straight shot or anything like that, but a full-blown obstacle course, and yet, to Izuku it might as well be easy as pie. activating one for all at about 30% alongside the suite of physical enhancement quirks that his father had personally curated to keep him from damaging his body. While he was using the incredibly powerful stockpile quirk, Izuku goes blasting down the course. To their credit, the others try their best to keep up with him. But their best isn't good enough, even with him using just 30%. Setsuna, out of everyone, probably does the best at keeping up with him at first, mostly because her quirk allows her to split her body into so many different pieces and fling those pieces out from one another. So, even as her feet start running back at the starting line, her entire body is bursting forward through air, extending out hundreds of feet at very high speeds. In the beginning, her fingertips are actually out ahead of him, but as soon as Izuku catches sight of the sneaky move, he puts on an extra little burst of speed and blows past even those, blowing her out of the water as well. Arriving back at the finish line quite a ways ahead of everyone else, Izuku grins as Amplifier stares at him, visibly impressed. Meanwhile, the others all show up one by one, some panting and out of breath, and some not due to the nature of their quirks. But at the end of the day, the result is the same. None of them were as fast as him. Momo blushes as he catches her eye shortly after she finishes, looking at him in wonder. Wow. That was amazing. Momo is the one who starts the sentence, but it's Setsuna who finishes it. The two girls share an indecipherable look while Izuku just grins cheekily, planting his hands on his hips. Amplifier, meanwhile, jots down their times and whistles at his. I'm fairly new to the faculty, obviously, but if that's not a new record, I'll eat my top. Izuku just laughs it off, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. Just doing my best. That you did. Hey, what's your name again? Never mind, I've got it right here. Izuku Midoriya is impressive. Izuku can't help but grin, noticing the way that Amplifier no longer refers to him as kid and has apparently upgraded him to an actual name in her mind. Clearly, she's having a hard time reconciling some feelings she's currently experiencing with his more youthful age. Heh. That's okay though, he'll show her that he's mature for his age soon enough. Realizing that it's not just the two of them and that there are a lot more students to test, Amplifier coughs into her hand and jolts a bit. Right. Well, for all of you, the next thing is, let me see the interview here. Yeah, interview. You'll each be interviewed by a member of the school faculty. Here's the room number. Go there and wait to be called on. With nothing else to do, Izuku just takes the information down and heads into the campus building alongside the others he raced with. They're soon in a waiting room together, the six of them, but before Izuku can start to chat up anyone and build more connections, he's called upon almost immediately. Izuku Midoriya to room 11 please. Shrugging, he heads on in only to do a double take at who he sees waiting for him. Making sure the door is closed and locked behind him first, Izuku turns towards his interviewer and raises an eyebrow, planting his hands on his hips and shaking his head. Oh come on, this has to be a conflict of interests. Nana Shimura smiles, licks her lips, and drops to her hands and knees as she crawls forward towards him, the gorgeous dark-haired older woman making it to him in record time and swiftly extracting his banana from its confines. He's still a little aroused from what he and Momo had been doing, though he'd used his quirks during the practical exam to make his erection go away so it wouldn't be a distraction. With no reason to hold it back anymore, he lets himself spring back to full mast in Nana's hands, making her coo as she nuzzles his banana to her heart's content. I can be very forceful about things I want, master. Technically, you were to be interviewed by midnight, but I just wanted to be sure that you would have the most optimal time. Staring down at her for a moment, Izuku grunts. Take out your tits. Wrap them around my banana while we talk. Nana doesn't hesitate to obey him, pulling her top down until her busty chest bounces free and then moaning as she gropes and squeezes her tits for a second before wrapping them around his banana and sliding them up and down his throbbing length. Applying a bit of spit as well to slice things up and lubricate her cleavage for him some more, she looks up at him with nothing but devotion in her eyes. As damaged as she'd been, Nana Shimura apparently had a strong personality. She considered him her master, she apparently couldn't live without him, and yet she was definitely capable of making decisions for herself. Now, wasn't she? Reaching out, Izuku grabs a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back rather roughly and most definitely firmly as he stares down into her eyes. And did you stop to consider whether or not I wanted to interview Midnight over you, Nana? Her eyes widen slightly at that, even as Izuku thrusts forward, his banana head bumping into her chin and his shaft pistoning back and forth through the tight valley afforded by her soft, voluptuous tits. No, you didn't. You acted of your own accord on your own selfish impulses, didn't you? A bright blush spreads across Nana's cheeks as she ducks her head in embarrassment and shame. Izuku knows he's right, and not just because of that reaction. Nana Shimura might need a firmer leash than he originally thought. Then again, maybe she didn't. Maybe this was just fine. Sure, she'd made him miss out on a chance to get in with Midnight early on, but at the same time he'd have all the opportunities in the world with the R-rated heroine later on. The fact that she was even a teacher at this school still boggled Izuku's mind, all things considered, but he wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. Just like he wasn't about to pass up on an opportunity to fuck Nana, even if she had irritated him a little bit. Using his hold on her hair, Izuku repositions Nana's head and glides his banana right into her mouth then and there, pushing deep into her waiting maw as she opens wide. Her eyes are apologetic now as they stare up at him, her hands continuing to wrap her tits around the vast majority of his banana. Izuku fucks her face and tits in unison for a good long while, staying silent as he mulls over what he's just been told. Nana had gone out of her way for him, technically. While an argument could be made that she was just being possessive and obsessive over him, having his interview with her did mean he was practically a shoo-in for UA. The nepotism was very real and very in your face, but if Nezu had allowed this much, then there was no way Izuku wouldn't get in now. Still, one had to wonder if it was good for Nana to be making decisions for him like this. Or should he curtail her behavior here and now while he had the chance? He could forgive her and even thank her for this opportunity, or he could admonish her further and punish her for her actions. Whichever he decided, it would further cement their relationship with one another, wouldn't it? She already called him master, but at the same time he'd in turn had her take up a position as a heroics teacher here at UA. There was an argument to be made for her needing to be able to make decisions on the fly and have a certain level of agency, but there was also an argument to be made for keeping her submissive and under his control. With a grunt and a sharp exhalation of breath, it doesn't take that long for him to do so after what he and Momo had done just a little while ago. His seed explodes into Nana's mouth and she hurriedly swallows it all down as he watches her from on high. Kneeling in front of him, the previous holder of One for All stares up at her master, awaiting his next order, awaiting his final verdict. Izuku, meanwhile, has already made a decision. Izuku was well aware that he had a dark side to him. Call it what you will, nature or nurture. Personally, he considered it a mixture of both. His father's shadow would always loom over him, it seemed. He was his father's son after all, having inherited Hisashi's love for all things Quirk-related, his insatiable drive for knowledge, and his ambitious bent. On top of that, there was the nurture side of things to consider. There was no denying it, Izuku had been raised in a very specific way by his father. They were a pair of control freaks of the highest order, the both of them, and not only had Izuku inherited that controlling nature, he'd had it taught to him as well. And yet, he wanted to be better. He didn't want to be forced into the shadows, like his father was all those years ago. He wanted to be on top of the world, but that didn't mean he couldn't have anyone beside him. It would be a very lonely existence if Izuku didn't seek to correct the faults in his character now. His instinct is to punish Nana for overstepping her bounds. For the briefest of moments, he tightens his grip on her hair, knowing that he's doing so to painful levels from the barest wince on her face. But then Izuku relaxes his hold, releasing her hair altogether. For a second, Nana slows to a stop, but when she sees the smile on his face as he gazes down on her, the beautiful buxom older woman goes back to sliding her tits up and down his banana and gliding her mouth across his length. As she continues the tit-job-blowjob combo of her own volition with no input from Izuku, he sighs and rests his hand atop her head instead. You did well, Nana. Just be careful, please. I don't want you to get in trouble on my behalf. Pulling her mouth off of his banana with a pop, continuing to move her tits up and down his member, Nana smiles a somewhat wicked smile, her eyes dancing with delight. Of course, master. I won't let anyone pull us apart. And Nezu needs me right now. With Yagi out of commission and on his last legs, the principal can't afford to say no to me when I ask for little things like the right to interview you personally, or when I sweep the interview room for hidden recording devices and disable them without his input. Izuku's eyes widened at that, the young man jolting in surprise. He hadn't even considered the idea that they might be being recorded. Stupid of him, really. But Nana just smiles and nods. It's alright, master. Like I said, I won't let anyone pull us apart. She'd come a long way from the comatose woman trapped in that strange Quirk-created crystal his father had her in. Izuku figured that more and more of her original personality was asserting itself as time went on, but from the look of things, since she'd imprinted on him, her loyalty would always be to him first and foremost. It likely helped that Nana Shimura was a woman out of time. Her family was gone, and her protege was a dying, decrepit husk of a man. Izuku was the only person left for her to latch onto and latch on. Abruptly pulling away from his banana, Nana falls back on her haunches, adopting the pose of a crab for a moment as she spreads her thick thighs and reaches down between them. Please, master. Please fuck me now. Well, after everything she'd done for him today, how could Izuku do anything else? Dropping to his knees before her, slapping his banana down on her wet cunt with a juicy smack, he pushes into her, sliding into her slick but tight depths with a heartfelt groan. Her body was so very sensitive when he was involved. His banana, his mouth, his very touch, all of it was just too much for Nana, and the dark-haired woman was all too eager to indulge in the decadent pleasure that he represented for her. Izuku was also all too eager to indulge. He might have pushed back on some of his darkness, but this he couldn't hold back from. According to his father, he got this all from his mother. All for one was ever the analytical soul, the type to plot and plan out every single little thing. The vast majority of people were nothing more than pieces on a game board for him. Even Izuku's mother had only been a means to an end. Izuku liked to think he was different, that he was special, and their final interactions definitely lent credence to that idea. But there was no changing the facts. Hisashi had been very, very slow to love. By comparison, Izuku had always been something of a people person, or at least more of one than his father. Of course, the forced isolation and rampant bullying from being thought quirkless for much of his life had caused some issues, which had led to him withdrawing inwards and turning down a more analytical path like his father. But Izuku's true self was more empathic than that. He was more emotional, and always would be. He loved, and when he loved deeply. He might have plans for how to best utilize Momo as an asset in the far-flung future, but at the moment he'd mostly approached her because she was a cute girl who he thought had a cool quirk. After their interaction, he found himself liking her quite a lot and wanting to spend more time with her for the sake of such a thing. With a low grunt, Izuku proceeds to empty his balls inside of Nana, uncaring of the possible complications of doing so. He just can't help himself, he longs to spill his seed inside of her, and so he does so. Of course, there's the possibility of something happening because of it, or maybe not. They'll cross that road when they get there, one way or the other, and Izuku doesn't intend to let what may or may not stop him from enjoying himself in the moment. Still, once he's done, and Nana has recovered from her rather funny embarrassing O-face, Izuku pulls out and sits back on his ass, panting a little, as he grins at her. They're both somewhat sweaty now, covered in a thin sheen from the exertion of their physical activities. So, got any actual questions for me, or was that the interview? Pushing herself up into a seating position as well, Nana lets out a sheepish laugh. No, there actually are some questions I should probably ask you to get your answers down for the record. But we both know you'll answer them perfectly, at the end of the day you're a shoo-in, Izuku. Though technically I'm not supposed to just say that. Nana winks, even, as Izuku nods and grins. To be fair, the interview portion of the recommendation exam was mostly a formality designed to weed out the truly mentally unstable. You didn't necessarily want to let a potential future serial killer into UA, as it were, or maybe you did, but you definitely wanted to know who had those sort of tendencies, so you could try to steer them clear of such a terrible path. That was what an institution like the US did after all, taught the young and made every effort to build them up properly for life. Of course, Izuku was already taught. He was already built up. In fact, he was probably going to be the most mature student in the entire school. Not that he wouldn't gain anything by going to UA, but Izuku expected it to be more in terms of connections for his future than anything else. Still, Nana was right. As they started going over the questions and she recorded down his answers, Izuku said what he knew needed to be said. That was the problem with interview tests like this one. If you were smart enough, if you knew the game being played, it was all too easy to game the system and make sure that those listening heard what they wanted to hear. At the end of the day, Izuku was indeed a shoo-in for UA. It would be interesting to see who else made it interesting indeed to find out just who got past both the exam he'd taken as well as the regular entrance exam, the one he'd avoided by having Nana vouch for him in Yagi's place. Very interesting indeed. The fuck do you think you're doing, shitty Deku, loitering around a place like this? Doesn't tell me you were thinking of sneaking in, you idiot. And there it was. Izuku had been wondering when he would be confronted by his childhood bully. Kitsuki Bakugo was, well, she was supposed to be some sort of catalyst for everything he wanted to be, as a hero, or something. A stepping stone, if you will, on his path to becoming number one. Admittedly, for a long time, he just considered her a nuisance. Partially because even after all this time, he still somewhat cared for her. Turning to face the girl in question, Izuku lays eyes on Kitsuki Bakugo for the first time since their graduation from middle school and the start of summer break. She looks good in UA's school uniform, he has to admit. The blouse and skirt combo really suit her mature body, and Izuku has to keep his eyes from dipping downward at the side of her blouse unbuttoned near the top and showing off way too much cleavage. Of course, she doesn't make things better when she crosses her arms over her chest and glares at him angrily. I ask you a question, Deku. The fuck are you doing here, wearing that uniform? I know I told you already to give up on this stupid dream. Sighing, Izuku shakes his head. I was accepted to UA, Kitsumi. I passed their recommendation exam. That gets wide eyes from Kitsumi, because even though she'd been the closest thing their school had ever had to a prodigy, the closest thing they'd ever had to a star, she pointedly had not received an invitation to participate in UA's recommendation exam. No, rather, the bombastic fiery young woman would have been forced to participate in the entrance exam instead. When she hadn't seen him there, she must have assumed he'd finally given up on his dreams to join UA. In reality, he'd gone over her head, going above and beyond, and getting in another way. It clearly rankled something fierce, and Kitsumi's red eyes narrow as her hands curl into fists. Don't fuck around, you shitty Deku. You, get into the recommendation exam. Don't make me laugh. And then, despite it being in front of the school they were now supposed to both be attending, despite it being in public, Kitsumi tries to do what she always does when a situation confuses or perplexes her. When something doesn't make sense, the explosive girl resorts to violence, plain and simple. Leaping forward, she aims what will obviously be an explosive punch right next to him. Not actually at him, lest she blow a hole through him or something, but just close enough to fuck up his hearing and singe him a fair bit. Izuku should know, he's well used to experiencing her less than tender mercies from years and years of bullying. However, this time things are different. This time, he doesn't actually have to hold back anymore. With a combination of quirks backing up one for all, Izuku lashes out faster than Kitsumi can make her fist explode, grabbing her hand just as her sweat ignites. The explosion still happens, but only against the inside of his palm, as Izuku stops her dead in her tracks and doesn't even jolt, planting himself like a brick wall. Except, more than a brick wall, because Kitsumi had enough power to go through brick walls if she truly wanted to. Admittedly, she might have been pulling her explosion in the same way she was pulling her punch, but given he doesn't feel anything, Izuku can't help but smile, even as Kitsumi stares at him in gobsmacked disbelief. Almost immediately, she goes for another swing with her free hand. This one is aimed directly at his face. He's half tempted to let it hit just to see if he can tank it, but no, he catches that hand too, and suddenly he's holding on to both of Kitsumi's fists as she pulls against him to no avail, red eyes as wide as dinner plates. YUW what? Leaning in close, Izuku lowers his voice to a whisper. I'll only say this once, Kitsumi. I'd really appreciate it if you wouldn't call me Deku anymore. As you can see, it's no longer applicable. He's trying to be kind about it. Perhaps that's his mistake. Or perhaps Izuku knows exactly how his soft, tender tone and kind voice will be received. Perhaps that's why he does it anyways, just to provoke her without provoking her. Either way, Kitsumi reacts exactly as he would have expected and proceeds to headbutt him, the beads of sweat on her forehead igniting. Izuku lets his own head be rocked back by the explosion, knowing full well that they're attracting some attention by this point. And yet, when the dust settles and he's no worse for wear, no one says anything. No one tries to stop them. Kitsumi is left trembling, glaring at him in disbelief as he just grins cheekily and shrugs. Bit of a late bloomer, apparently. No. I refuse to accept this. Someone like you can't be strong. You don't have a quirk, you're quirkless. Apparently, I'm not. Shut up. You and me, right now. Lifting an eyebrow, Izuku looks at where he's still holding Kitsumi with her fists. Though we were already doing that, Kitsumi. The proper fight. To decide our place at UA. I refuse to go to school with you, you shitty Deku. So duel me for it. And if I win, you go away. You leave me alone. Izuku just bananas his head to the side. And if I win, then I'll go. Fuck it, whatever. But I don't want you to give up on your dream for me, Kitsumi. Just shut up. If you win, it'll be whatever, got it, let's do this. Sheesh, she sure was eager, and after 3 of her attacks on him had absolutely no effect. Was she holding back that much? Or was she just so frazzled and out of it that she wasn't thinking straight? Honestly, it could be both. Either way, Izuku better decide fast how he wanted to handle this. He could go off and duel her, or he could blow her off and get to class. It'd probably make her angrier than ever, though he wasn't sure how she would respond. Alternatively, could make plans to fight after school instead to try and keep her from blowing up any further until then. Fine. Itsumi's response is a grin so savage that it makes the hairs on Izuku's arms stand on end. He quickly continues on, wanting to avoid her starting the fight right here and right now in front of the damn school, if possible. But not now. Stiffening up, a mulish expression immediately begins forming on Kitsumi's face, her eyes blazing with anger and irritation. Still, Izuku doesn't let it get to him. Put bluntly, he never had. Acting the part back in middle school of a quirkless loser who got bullied by his classmates had all been part of his and all for one's plan. Being a nobody who then went on to save lives and show that he had the real heart of a hero beating in his chest had been the whole idea from the get-go. while All Might came across as a boisterous, over-the-top man who wasted no time with the small things in life, the truth couldn't be further from that reality. Izuku's father had known that All Might would run an expensive and thorough background check on Izuku once he finally caught the number one pro hero's eye. Izuku had spent his entire life preparing for that background check. He'd toiled for years to create a public persona and paper trail that wouldn't ping any alarms or raise any red flags. But that didn't mean he'd actually ever feared Kitsumi or his other bullies. And he certainly wasn't afraid of her now. If we're not only late to class, but they find out it was because we were fighting, we'll both be kicked out of UA. I'm not going to let that happen, so we'll meet in the park after school and settle this there, alright. Knowing precisely how much of a hothead Kitsumi is and really needing her to listen to him here, Izuku does not avoid bringing the same social quirks he used on Momo to bear. This time, however, he's not trying to smooth talk or infatuate the girl he's speaking with, he's merely trying to make her listen, trying to get her to see reason. Luckily, Kitsumi's ire dies down after a moment, the raging inferno of her fury and anger becoming smoldering embers as she glares at him but also backs off, yanking herself free of his grip and scoffing as she crosses her arms over her ample chest. Whatever. The fucking park then, after school. You better not chicken out, Deku. Izuku tenses at that but buries his anger for the moment. He'll put her in her place at the park. Maybe that's what he'll take when he wins. He'll order her to never call him Deku ever again. Though that's not necessarily one-for-one comparable to what Kitsumi is asking for, is it? The explosive ill-tempered girl wants him to leave UA entirely. Though she doesn't know it, she wants him to not only give up on his dream but squander his entire life's work. She wants him to turn his back on his father's sacrifice. Izuku refuses to do that. In fact, despite being a rather level-headed mature young man, he can admit Kitsumi's demands make him more than a little incensed. Though he's not showing it to the same extent that she is, Izuku suspects he's looking forward to their fight after school just as much as the explosive young woman. For now, though, they both head inside, making their way to their classroom, which it would seem they're going to be sharing. Class 1, and needless to say, Kitsumi is none too happy when she reaches the door first, only to glance back and see him following right behind her. Her eyes widen and her teeth grit as Izuku just gives her a single smile and a shrug of the shoulders. In the end, what can they do but put up with it? Growling, as if he's personally offended her and all her ancestors, Kitsumi storms into the classroom, Izuku following behind a moment later. They aren't the last ones in by a long shot, but they also aren't the first either, likely held back by their small altercation outside the school, while a few others slipped in. That's annoying, because Izuku had every intention of being one of the first to arrive. He wanted to make a good first impression, after all. Not that their teacher is anywhere in sight. In hindsight, Izuku should have asked Nana to just tell him who his homeroom teacher was going to be. But maybe it was better this way, with it being a surprise. All she had told him was that he wasn't going to believe his eyes when he saw them. Apparently, there had been something of a faculty shakeup at UA this year, with Nana Shimura replacing Yagi Toshinori being only one of the changes. As curious as Izuku was about his teacher, he was just as curious about his classmates. It was interesting, watching them all file into the classroom. Indeed, the number of Hero Corps students whose quirks altered their biology was higher than he had initially thought it would be. Of course, he'd done his homework here. He knew everyone who had passed the entrance exam, both recommended and otherwise, and so he knew who might be in his class. Admittedly, he'd spent a bit more time researching the girls than the boys. He was a straight, hot-blooded young man in the prime of his life, with a whole lot of power at his disposal. Yes, he had his goals, to become the new No.1 pro hero and take the mantle from All Might so that he could effectively influence and change the world through popularity and being beloved by the masses, but he was also very interested in being personally loved as well. There was also the fact that the girls of the class had the more interesting quirks. And he totally wasn't biased just because those quirks were attached to nubile young women either, no sir. Compare, if you would, Ijiro Kirishima and Ichako Uraraka. The former was a young man with a quirk of hardening. It let him harden his skin to a highly durable level, but that was about it. Meanwhile, Chako's quirk, Zero Gravity, allowed her to nullify the effects of gravity on certain objects. Admittedly, Izuku's analytical mind, reinforced by his father's teachings, could think up a dozen different unique ways to use both quirks to their fullest potential. Especially if he could combine their effects with other quirks he had under his control, but that was neither here nor there. Chako's quirk was the cooler one, no questions asked. Then you had comparisons like Mashirao Jiro and Shadow Todoroki. One was a perfect combination of ice and fire quirks, a real powerhouse when it came to exercising control over the battlefield and any would-be opponents. The other had a tail for a quirk. 3 guesses which were which, and the first 2 didn't count. Even Kitsumi's quirk stood head and shoulders above most of the guys in the class. and the other girls, like Mina Shido, Sayu Asui, Kyoka Jiro, and Toru Hagakure, were nothing to scoff about either, both in looks and in their quirks. Of course, in Toru's case, Izuku had absolutely no idea what the young woman looked like. The floating school uniform, Toru was the invisible girl, and while the way the jacket clung to her body showed that she was certainly well endowed for her age, none couldn't really see anything else. Was it bad that aroused Izuku more than he cared to admit? Perhaps with the right quirks, he would be able to see her, sort of like a sonar or radar pinging off of her invisible flesh. But that would almost certainly not go undetected, and the invasiveness of such an action might get him in trouble. Better to save it for later, even if he was incredibly curious. Toru Hagakure, he would definitely be keeping an eye on her going forward. Even if she was invisible. And finally there was Momo. Already in the classroom when Izuku and Kitsumi arrived, the prim and proper heiress graces Izuku with a fond smile as he catches her eye. Having checked out the rest of the room for a bit and watched several more of their classmates wander in, Izuku finally decides to head over, noting that there's still a seat available next to the one friend he's made in the entire class. Sitting down next to Momo, he gives her a smile as well and watches as she blushes a little and ducks her head. Still smiling, it seems that Momo nevertheless has a hard time actually meeting his eyes, a reminder that they hadn't just become friends during the small break in the recommendation exam. They'd done more than that. Or rather, Izuku had. He wondered how many times Momo had masturbated to the memory of his tongue on her slit. He hoped it was several, if he was being honest. Leaning over, he whispers to the blushing girl. You might want to think about something other than that day, Momo. You're blushing up a storm. Maybe do some maths in your head, or something. Stiffening up, Momo nevertheless gives him a thankful look, even taking his advice. Izuku knew she would appreciate it, that she wouldn't want to be exposing her inappropriate feelings to the entire class this early. As far as he can tell, no one else noticed she was thinking about naughty things, not even the pervert who was already looking like he was going to be a problem child in the classroom, one Minoru Mineta. Izuku was aware of Minoru and his unscrupulous actions. The boy wanted to be a hero, but could barely go 10 minutes without towing the line and very nearly committing some sort of crime. Whatever UA might have been thinking, letting him into its hero program, he was already treading on thin ice with Izuku, thanks to Izuku's research. Minoru might not know it, but if he stepped over the line, Izuku would do everything in his considerable power to have the other boy removed. That might sound hypocritical, knowing that Izuku was also perving on the young women in their class, but the difference was, Izuku would never do anything without consent. Momo had appreciated his company and would appreciate his company in the future. Meanwhile, the others, well, he'd approach them in his own time, in their own unique ways. If they wanted anything to do with him, good. If they didn't, that was fine too. Minoru on the other hand, was already pissing off two of the less human-looking female classmates. Neither Mina Shido nor Tsuyu Asui look at all impressed with Minoru's perverted antics from what Izuku can see, and he's pretty sure the short boy is about to receive a beatdown when the back door of the classroom abruptly bursts open. No, not just bursts open, it's full-on kicked off of its hinges, flying across the classroom over the heads of everyone and smashing into the back wall before sliding down. Luckily, no one gets hurt. Yo. Guess what, kiddies, I'm your homeroom teacher. The entrance is so intense that there's a cloud of dust and smoke kicked up, leaving some of them coughing and hacking before it finally clears and reveals the owner of the voice. Only, Izuku doesn't need to see her to know who she is. He recognizes that voice, just like he would easily recognize the voices of every single pro hero in the top 10 by sheer virtue of always keeping up with all of their escapades and news interviews and whatnot. As such, his mouth is agape even before everyone else's, as Mirko the rabbit hero grins a confident grin, standing there with her fists on her broad hips, her muscular and toned dark-skinned body perfectly framed within her white and blue leotarд uniform. Everything about her screams power and strength for all of half a moment more before Mirko suddenly starts to sweat, her confidence disappearing in a second as she looks from the doorway she just came through to the door she just kicked across the room. I may have miscalculated the strength of UA's doors. You don't think they'll mind, do you? And like that, well, the mystique isn't entirely broken, there's no denying that it takes a heavy blow as the entire classroom sweat drops. Their new teacher is Mirko, who it seems is just as human and prone to making mistakes as the rest of them, right? So, first things first, we're handling the quirk apprehension test. Course, I'm sure most of you have already trained with your quirks quite a bit. Sure, you weren't allowed to use them in middle school, but come on, you wouldn't be here in this class if you weren't skirting the rules and bending the guidelines to their breaking points, bahahaha. After swiftly getting over her accidental vandalism, Mirko had introduced herself to the class properly, not that there was a single person in the room who didn't know who she was. Somewhat stunned into silence, nobody had seemed to know what to say, so in the end the rabbit hero had corralled them all out of the classroom and down to the field for this, a quirk apprehension test, apparently. Don't take it too seriously. I just want to get a good idea of where you're all at and see what your strengths and weaknesses are. So, all those physical education things you weren't allowed to use your quirks on back in middle school, we'll be using them now. Go all out, alright. It's the school motto after all. Anyways, before we begin, any questions? The hand shoots up into the air and Mirko rolls her eyes good-naturedly before pointing at him. A very stiff Tenuita steps forward, back ramrod straight and arms back at his sides as he swallowed thickly. My question does not have to do with the quirk apprehension test. I apologize, but my question is personal in nature. Why are you here at UA, ma'am? Weren't you just named the number 5 pro hero by the Hero Association? There's a heavily pregnant pause as everyone leans forward, anticipating Mirko's answer and wanting to know just as badly as the bespectacled boy. Mirko's smile, meanwhile, has become slightly frozen in place. Izuku is pretty sure he might be the only one who notices it, which is why he's the only one unsurprised by her answer. None of your business. But hey, if it makes you feel better, you can think that I'm here because shaping the heroes of tomorrow is the most heroic thing that someone can do or something. Ha. The way she spouts that out and then laughs at it makes it clear that that's not it, but she's also made it abundantly clear that she's not about to tell all of them. With that out of the way, Class 1 starts to get ready for the quirk apprehension test, and Izuku knows he has a decision to make. There are 3 options here, though only 2 of them really appeal to him. Going all out would it might draw attention from the wrong people, or it might be impressive enough to get him extra private lessons or something. Meanwhile, the middle of the pack would probably be safest, but was also boring. And finally, the choice he really didn't want to do was to go as low as he could to stay under the radar and not be impressive to anyone. But that wouldn't really jive well with his recommended student story, would it? It was his least favorite option for a reason, he supposed. Decisions. Alright, let's get started. Who wants to go first? I'll do it. Best to show these extras whose boss is nice and early. Is Izuku surprised that Kitsumi is the one who steps forward, brandishing her usual trademark arrogance and abandon a grin across her face? No, not really. Even as some of Class 1 shrinks back and others bristle indignantly, Kitsumi is just being herself. Still, as she steps up to the plate for the first test and proceeds to show off the versatility of her explosion quirk by speeding down the 50-meter dash, Izuku can't help but watch her and wants nothing more than to beat her. It was silly, maybe. After all, weren't he and Kitsumi already scheduled to settle things after school? There was no reason for him to get up in arms here, and now he already knew that he was better than Kitsumi, and he already had a time and place when he was going to show her that he was better than her. And yet, Izuku was still young. He acknowledged that fact about himself. He was young, somewhat untested, and almost entirely unproven. He wasn't a big shot pro hero yet, even if he was stronger than pretty much every pro hero on the leaderboard. None of them had any idea what was coming for them just yet, but for the moment at least, he was who he was. He wanted to make a name for himself. He had, in the recommendation exam. He'd broken records there. But that wasn't enough, not really. That wasn't in front of the entire class of his peers. These were the people he would be training beside for the next several years, and only a few of them had gotten to see him during the recommendation exam. Really, there was no reason to hold back here. Like Mirko had said, plus ultra. And so Izuku waits his turn, letting some of the others go ahead of him. Kitsumi's quirk certainly lets her go fast, but it doesn't make her the fastest person in the class. Just close to it. When it's finally Izuku's turn, Kitsumi's time has already been beaten, with the temperamental blonde busting a gasket over it and having to be brought down to earth by a knuckle sandwich grinding atop her head from Mirko, the rabbit hero of all people. But even with Mirko forcefully settling Kitsumi down, the explosive girl was still fuming. Of course, when Izuku makes his way to the starting line, Kitsumi all but visibly perks up, looking at him anticipatorily, clearly expecting to see a wimpy, quirkless failure of a brat, or maybe hoping she would. After all, he'd already shown her how strong he was just this morning. He'd caught her explosive fists in the palms of his hands. Did she really think he was going to fail here so she could just laugh at him or something? Making eye contact with Kitsumi, Izuku grins and then turns to focus on the task at hand. Having had more than enough time to plan this out, he draws upon a carefully curated suite of quirks. Like usual, they're focused around One for All, specifically, All for One's primary use in Izuku's life to support the quirk that those who thought they were in the know believed him to have. Everything he did needed to be able to be traced back to One for All, at least for now. Part of the upside of letting certain individuals, like the principal, know that he was All for One's son, meant that one day Izuku could discover having more quirks than One for All. though, whether or not he would be able to swing it so that he was allowed by the individuals who thought they had authority over him to take quirks from irredeemable villains or not, was still up in the air. Not that Izuku would let anyone stop him from being the greatest hero that not only Japan, but the entire world had ever known. He just had to be a little more discreet about it, potentially. For now, though, it was the first day of school. A lot of that was in the future. Right now, he just needed to show his former childhood friend turned childhood bully that she wasn't going to be able to smack him around anymore. And so, as Mirko calls out for him to go, Izuku dashes forward and is well aware that he's using enough power to blow everyone else's speed, even those who haven't gone yet, clear out of the way. Humming out the other side of the 50-yard dash, Izuku grins as he looks back to see stunned faces on not just his classmates, but also his teacher. Even Mirko is visibly shocked and altogether impressed for a moment before she manages to collect herself far faster than the kids around her. If not for his sensory quirks, he might have even missed it. Of course, there's absolutely no way for him to miss Katsumi's reaction. What the actual fuck was that? What the fuck, you shitty Deku? You. Once again, Mirko's fist comes down atop Katsumi's head, grinding away into the blonde spiky hair as the rabbit hero grins. Your yelling is hurting my ears. As cheery as she sounds, there's no denying the tone in Mirko's voice brooks no argument, and even arrogant Banane Katsumi isn't dumb enough to pick a fight with the number 5 pro hero. Meanwhile, Izuku sees several of the girls in class 1 looking at him in a new light, and one girl, one Momo Yaoi Rozu, looking at him in the same light she'd already been looking at him with even more desire than before. Giving Mom a wink and Mirko a nod, Izuku moves back to stand among the rest of the class like nothing had happened. Seeing this, Mirko just moves them along to the next test. The day continues on in a similar vein, of course. There's no way Izuku can be convinced, even by his own mind, to rein himself in after how good the reaction to that first test felt. And so, he continues to blow things out of the water. There are a multitude of different tests, of course. All of them designed to find the limits and the potential of their quirks. As potential pro heroes, each and every member of Class 1 has to have some value, right? Well, not all of them. Some individuals are perhaps not meant for pro hero work. Someone like Mineta Minoru, for instance. Oh, don't get Izuku wrong, the short boy's quirk is a versatile one. It's perfect for capturing villains, from what Izuku can't see. And if that quirk belonged to someone with a decent work ethic and a good, solid head on their shoulders, then maybe that person could become an exceptional hero. Unfortunately, Mineta was neither of those things. In fact, the longer the day went on, the more Izuku felt like Mineta was wearing his welcome in Class 1 thin exceptionally fast. The boy was an incorrigible pervert and quite rapidly earned the enmity of every girl in the class, as well as several of the boys. On top of that, his quirk, while slightly useful, did not lend itself to the physical tests that Mirko was running them through. Mineta was small, slightly overweight, and altogether weak. He was easily coming last in every single test they did. Meanwhile, Izuku was coming first in every single test they did. As previously mentioned, there are a multitude of tests, and Izuku does his best to excel at every single one of them. From the grip strength test to the standing long jump and every other test in between. Calling upon one for all, and the quirks he's curated to support it in a myriad of different ways, Izuku constantly shows up not just Katsumi, but everyone else in the class, as well. He'd feel worse about it if he wasn't seeing Mirko paying him more and more attention, or the way Momo looked like her panties were fucking sopping from watching him kick ass. The other girls were also giving him looks, some of them appraising him, some of them competitively frowning and wanting to show him up somehow. Needless to say, Katsumi undeniably fell into that latter category, but then, so did Shako. Shadow Todoroki, with her red and white hair, the daughter of Endeavor, and the perfect combination of ice and fire quirks. Except, she only ever used her ice for the entirety of the quirk apprehension test. At one point, Mirko commented on that when Shako got a lower score than she otherwise might have if she'd just used the full strength of her quirk. Her response definitely spoke to some sort of issue. I refuse. I will be a pro hero with just my ice. This is my pledge. Suoya, that was awkward. But regardless, Izuku almost regretted choosing to chat up Momo instead of Shako at the recommendation exam. Or not regretting, but still pondering what could have been. Because the more he won, the more intensely Shako seemed to study him, and not in the same way some of the other girls were studying him. Certainly not in the same way Momo was studying him. Whereas Katsumi was all fire and brimstone every time Izuku showed off, forcing Mirko to come down on the explosive girl hard each and every time, Shako's growing incensed attitude was all too icy, as if the frigid girl saw him as her rival. Which of course, only pissed Katsumi off more when Shako would beat her score in some test and not even care because Izuku had beat them both. It was an unreciprocated three-way triangle of hate, with Kitsumi angry at both Shako and Izuku, Shako seemingly angry at Izuku, and Izuku refusing to hold back just to make either of them happier. When the final test arrived, it was clear that neither girl was willing to even remotely back down. Alright then. Final test of the day. The pitch. Simple enough, throw a ball, as far as you can, heh. Any volunteers? By this point, everyone just turns to Kitsumi, as she all but rockets forward. Me? No one is remotely surprised, even, as Kitsumi grabs the baseball and grits her teeth, glaring at Izuku in particular. Offering her a benign smile right back, he just watches her along with the rest of the class, which of course, only pisses her off more that he's acting so casually about it. Still, with her quirk, Kitsumi soon has the baseball all looped up if you will. Her secretions, and nitroglycerin-esque sweat, soon cover the glistening baseball. Then, she leaps into the air and explodes upwards with her other hand. Everyone watches, with Mirko holding up a device clearly meant to measure the distance the ball goes, as Kitsumi flies up maybe 100 feet before exploding the baseball out of her swung hand, flinging it high in the sky. The baseball disappears from normal view, but the device Mirko is using continues to track it, even, as Kitsumi comes down in a three-point landing, a vicious grin on her face. Let's see the shitty Deku beat that. Her words are muttered, and though Mirko's ears twitch, clearly hearing them, the rabbit hero doesn't come down on Kitsumi's head again. After all, it's progress after a fashion. Nice one, Bakugo. Alright, next. Now everyone is looking at Izuku, as if all of their pitches are just going to be filler compared to his and Kitsumi's rivalry. Which is true, but before Izuku can step up, he's surprised when someone shoulders past him instead. I will go. Shadow Todoroki steps up to the place, with Mirko raising a brow, but handing her a baseball all the same. After a moment of staring at it, ice begins to form around Shako until there's something of a cannon right in front of her. Placing the ball inside of it, she just stares for a moment and then a pillar of ice slams out of the center of the cannon, going and going as the ball travels on the end of it for a moment before finally, the ice stops and the ball keeps going. Up and up and up, this baseball too leaves everyone's natural sight. But of course, Izuku, with his vision enhanced, can track it for a while longer. Which is why he knows even before Mirko says that Shako, not bad at all. But not quite as good as Bakugo's. As Kitsumi crows with victory, Shako doesn't pay the other girl the slightest mind. Instead, her eyes move to Izuku, and it's very clear that she knows she lost, not because she didn't do as good as Kitsumi, but because by not doing as good as Kitsumi, she has no chance of beating him. Which is very perceptive. Izuku tries to give her a commiserating grin, but Shako just stiffens and turns away, disappearing back into the class. Finally, it's Izuku's turn. He takes the baseball from Mirko, who gives him a knowing grin and a wink that almost seems borderline sultry. Is his teacher being inappropriate with him? Well, no matter. Izuku just grins and winks back at her before stepping up to the throwing line. All of class 1 is watching him as he winds up. Nothing flashy like Kitsumi or Shako. Nothing explosive, nothing constructed. Just him and his arm strength, or so it would seem. Calling upon one for all, Izuku uses his other quirks to regulate the insane power of the stockpile quirk. A slight green glow surrounds him as he draws upon this power that All Might so foolishly gave him and that his father's sacrifice has let him begin to master in record time. And he uses it to throw a baseball. Such epic immense power being used for such a benign purpose. For Class 1A, all they see is a blur as Izuku's arm explodes into action before settling back down less than a second later like nothing happened. But the ball that was previously clutched in his fingers is gone, and Mirko, with her device, can't help the look on her face as it chimes, and then chimes again, and then beeps. Everyone looks to her for confirmation, with Shako seeming resigned and Kitsumi trembling with anticipation. Mirko, meanwhile, just grins and shrugs as she looks at Izuku. Out of range. Looks like it probably burnt up leaving the atmosphere. Izuku's grin is victory made manifest, even as Kitsumi positively howls at the ridiculousness of it all. The rest of the quirk apprehension test passes in what feels like the span of a moment, with Izuku riding high, feeling like he's on cloud 9 the whole way through. Everyone else throws the baseball, and to be fair, some of them do really well. Mineta takes last again of course, and that's that. The quirk apprehension test took all day, so when it's over, Mirko dismisses them. However, after doing so, she calls out to Izuku. Yo, Midoriya. You have time to stick around and chat for a little bit back in my office. Nothing too important can wait if you have other things to do. It's clear that Mirko is really not used to being a teacher because she technically has the authority to just order him to stay after class and talk with her. That is a thing she can do. Instead, she's treating him like he's her peer already, despite her being the number 5 pro hero and Izuku being who he is. It leaves him in a bit of an odd spot because technically Mirko is his teacher, so he should say yes and find out what she needs. But on the other hand, he already made plans with Kitsumi ahead of time and really is looking forward to putting the explosive girl in her place once and for fucking all. It's possible he might be able to do both, depending on what Mirko needs. It's also possible that an impatient Kitsumi will decide he's a no-show and just bail, only to cause greater problems down the line. By giving him the choice, Mirko has put the ball in Izuku's court. Blow off Kitsumi to see what his teacher wants from him, or offer Mirko tomorrow after school to talk instead, so he can properly deal with Kitsumi today. One way or another, it would seem he's got a meeting with a gorgeous woman to get to. Just a matter of deciding which to attend. After a moment of thought, he didn't want to keep Mirko waiting. In the end, Izuku came to a decision. Flashing the beautiful dark-skinned woman an apologetic smile, he lets out a sheepish laugh as he runs a hand through the back of his untamed green hair. Haha, actually I sort of already have plans for after school today, ma'am. So, if it's not too much trouble, let's meet up tomorrow. Mirko looks taken aback and frankly, so does the class. But they don't understand. Kitsumi has already stormed out, so it's not like she's there to see with her own 2 eyes that Izuku has a reasonable excuse for blowing off their after-school meeting. As such, he really does have to hedge his bets there. But mostly, he chooses to handle Kitsumi today and speak with Mirko tomorrow because at the end of the day, he's really looking forward to this. Kitsumi Bakugo has been a pain in Izuku's ass for so fucking long. The bitch has bullied him for years, and while that was technically all part of the plan, it doesn't excuse Kitsumi's culpability in matters. Izuku wants that sweet revenge, no matter how unheroic such feelings might be. Besides, it's not like he's going to kill her or anything, just humiliate her immensely. Oh. Sure, Midoriya. Tomorrow it is. Recovering quickly, Mirko is all grins as she gives him a big thumbs up, seeming to be a little psyched now that they have a time set for their meeting. Izuku just bobs his head up and down and heads out, a little curious as to what his homeroom teacher wants with him after just one day. Although he has his suspicions. She's undoubtedly impressed by him. That much was obvious from the looks he was getting from her during the Quirk apprehension test. But what form would that take going forward? What might she try behind closed doors? Izuku just chuckles and shakes his head. He was being a little silly. What were the chances that Mirko, the rabbit hero, with her rabbit physiology, would have some sort of mental hang-up that made her horny all the time? What were the chances that she was looking for a fuck buddy to handle her immense, over-the-top energy, and she'd chosen one of her students just because he seemingly fit the bill when it came to endless stamina? Nah, that sort of shit only happened in pornos. Still, Izuku was eager to cultivate relationships. He'd already started with Momo, and with the heiress already waiting for their next alone time together, Izuku had to admit he was more than eager to expand his list of contacts. When he finally graduated and became a full-fledged pro hero, he fully intended to take the world by storm. But first, much like in every shonen anime, he had to handle his childhood bully, didn't he? Normally, there would be a climactic battle, and he would show how strong he'd gotten, but still barely squeak ahead before perhaps befriending his bully. Well, that wasn't happening today. Izuku wasn't here to play games. Arriving at the park, he heads out into the more heavily wooded area. When he'd initially told Kitsumi that they would duel at the park after school, he'd wondered if she understood what he was saying properly. The two of them had had a spot, as young children, back in the back of the park. It was a small clearing in the woods where they'd hunted bugs and the like. He'd figured the likelihood of Kitsumi remembering that specific spot was too high, but she hadn't asked for clarification on which park, so he figured she knew that much at least. To his mild surprise though, she's nowhere to be seen in the more public and open part of the park, which leaves him wondering if she went to the wrong place. The other option seemed a step too far for the bully to recall, but it was worth a check. And so Izuku made his way back to their old spot, that small clearing in the woods, and to his greater surprise, he finds Kitsumi waiting for him there, his eyebrows climbing on his forehead as she turns to face him, arms crossed over her chest and teeth gritted as her eyes flash in anger. How do you suddenly have a quirk, Deku? Of course. He'd expected her to still be deeply in denial about the whole thing. But while she was still calling him worthless, the day's events had changed things for her. Kitsumi could no longer deny the truth, not when it was shoved into her face across a dozen physical tests in front of an entire class of witnesses. Izuku hadn't just shown off, he'd completely blown her, and his other closest competitors cleared out of the water. A few of the tests had allowed for some of the students to shine a bit more brightly. Kitsumi and Shako hadn't taken second and third place on every test. But Izuku's quirk, or rather, his quirks with an S, had allowed him to blast on through every single test, taking the top spot again and again and again. He might as well be the second coming of All Might for how good he'd done today. And given that he knew Kitsumi wanted to be the second coming of All Might or at least the #1 pro hero, that must rankle something fierce. All modern science dictates that I must have always had it, Kitsumi. I'm just a late bloomer. But the snarl, Kitsumi suddenly turns and punches her fist into the tree next to her, the strike exploding and sending bark chips flying everywhere as she does so. That doesn't explain it. That doesn't explain how you could go from a total zero who never showed an ounce of aptitude in anything all our school years to this in just 10 months. 10 months, right, the time Izuku had spent training with All Might after the sludge villain attack where he'd saved Kitsumi's life. All of it had been scripted, of course. All part of his father and his master plan to get All Might to give up his quirk. 10 months of pure torturous training, but it's not like that was where Izuku had begun his training. No, he'd just hidden it before then, hidden what he was capable of. He might have been quirkless, but he was far from helpless. The son of All for One couldn't afford to be. Still, Izuku could see how Kitsumi would fixate on that time period as the time when everything must have changed, while at the same time expressing her disbelief that everything could change in such a short time span. It was easy enough to just latch onto the lie. You mean 10 months ago when I saved your life, Kitsumi? The explosive girl's eyes widen at that and she roars as she lunges across the clearing at him. But Izuku is ready for her yet again and catches her fists in his hands. Even as they explode against his palms, he just tanks it, smirking at her casually. You're right, by the way. That was the day I first awakened my quirk. That was the day I finally unlocked this power. Kitsumi's eyes widened at the admission. Even though Izuku is lying through his teeth, she doesn't know that. He's always been an exceptional liar, but now, with all of his father's quirks backing him up, he's a phenomenal liar. He can lie as easy as breathing, but more importantly than that, he can make people believe his lies, or at the very least believe that he believes them wholeheartedly. Doesn't make sense. You can't get this good in 10 months. She's pushing against his palms, trying to overpower him, but Izuku just holds her fast and shakes his head. You can if the right person takes you under their wing. That causes Kitsumi to freeze up. Her wide eyes stare at him as she realizes what Izuku is insinuating. More than before, she searches his face for even the slightest sign of deception. Amusing then, that this time Izuku is telling the truth, mostly. What he's leaving unsaid, that a pro hero witnessed him saving Kitsumi from the sludge villain, and then he unlocked his quirk, and that pro hero took him under his wing and began training Izuku up. He watches as that all goes through Kitsumi's head. The fiery-tempered girl isn't stupid by any means. She's capable of putting 2 and 2 together. Who did you trick into thinking you were hero material? Scoffing, Izuku pushes Kitsumi away from him, releasing her fists at the same time that he applies a fraction of his enhanced strength to his palms, causing her to go skidding back across the clearing. Oh, fuck off, Kitsumi. I'm more hero material than you. Or have you seen a lot of stories where the hero is a piece of shit bully who shits down her former best friend's throat for several years before going on to be the best of the best? No, I think we both know, narratively speaking, who's more favored to become a hero between us. Stories narratively speaking, this isn't some fucking anime, Izuku. This isn't some story. This is real life, and you're damn straight that I'm going to be a pro hero. Fuck you. Izuku just smiles grimly. Well, that's what we're here to decide, isn't it? Which of us continues on at UA? Which of us has to drop out and give up on our dreams? His deceptively calm, low tone causes a jolt to spasm through Kitsumi, and to his mild amusement, she takes half a step back before catching herself. Her hands curl into fists at her sides, as if she's ready to fight, but she also sounds decidedly uncertain. I thought you said you didn't want me to drop out if you won. Now that she's seen what he can really do, she's getting cold feet. Izuku flashes Kitsumi a smile that 100% doesn't reach his eyes or has one iota of kindness in it. I changed my mind. So, are we going to do this or what? Are we going to have our duel or are you backing out, Bakugo? Obviously, by asking, he ensures that Kitsumi doesn't back out. She can't, not in a million years. Even though they're alone, even though no one else is even aware of the challenge, he'd know. And she'd know. And that's unacceptable. And so, despite knowing deep down inside that she's outmatched, Kitsumi does what she does best. She starts the fight with a bang, launching forward and positively howling as she uses every bit of her quirk to try and blow him the fuck up. Izuku stands his ground and takes it. He weathers her most powerful attacks with his father's quirks backing up one for all, and he smiles the entire time, a big toothy grin, as she hammers into him for all she's worth. The end result, of course, is that his school uniform doesn't survive the encounter. His shirt exploded right off his body, reduced to a few shredded tatters in the wind. His pants are also ruined. before she can blow up his boxers as well. Izuku catches her by the fist again, once more capturing her explosion in the palm of her hand. Kitsumi jolts to a halt at this, and they make eye contact for a single moment before Izuku goes on the offense and buries his own fist right in the blonde girl's gut. Kitsumi chokes on her own spit as she doubles over his fist. He's careful not to shatter her ribs, but there's no doubt that they're going to be very bruised tomorrow. For the moment though, Kitsumi is lifted on the ground by the force of the blow, and when Izuku pulls his fist back a moment later, she comes crashing down, her feet swept out from under her. She hits the ground hard, even, as Izuku steps back and blows the smoke curling off of his fist away with a smirk. We can keep going, Kitsumi, but I'd say we both know this is my win. Shut up, Deku. It's not over yet. Despite her words, Kitsumi is visibly struggling to even get her arms and legs underneath her. Her all-out assault after a long day of exhausting herself trying to beat him in even one of the numerous physical tests they'd done, finished off by his singular punch to the gut, it's all taken its toll on the girl. She might have an impressive quirk, and she might have a strong level of physical conditioning to go along with it, but at the end of the day, all she really has is a normal human body. And even a normal human at peak physicality has their limits. Limits, it would seem, that Kitsumi has reached as she collapses back to the ground, gasping for air, panting for breath, and sobbing. Izuku quirks a brow up, not quite believing what he's hearing at first. Sauntering over to her, he doesn't waste time in grabbing Kitsumi by her spiky blonde locks and yanking her head up to find the tears are indeed streaming down her face. She snarls at him casually regarding her in her moment of weakness and even tries to take a swipe at him. But it's weak compared to her previous attacks, like a newborn kitten batting at a full-grown tomcat. Chuckling, Izuku just shakes his head. I'm not going to make you drop out of UA, Kitsumi. In fact, I'm not going to let you drop out of UA. Kitsumi's eyes widened at first, before scrunching up in confusion at that last bit. Izuku just grins. It occurs to me that you might take the opportunity to drop out of UA and apply to another hero school. That you might seek to still complete your path to pro hero, just as far away from me as possible. But I don't want that. So, you're going to stay at UA. You're going to train to be a pro hero right alongside me, constantly reminded that no matter how hard you try, you will never be able to beat me. Or I'll tell everyone how Katsuki Bakugo bullied me throughout my younger life. And Kitsumi, I have evidence. You don't want to push me. Exhausted, beaten down, Kitsumi nevertheless stiffened at that declaration. Izuku just grins and nods. Do we understand each other? Yes. Letting out a contented sigh, Izuku lets go of Kitsumi's hair, standing up. He's in just his boxers, but it'll probably be fine. He should be able to get home without being seen. Sparing one more glance down at Kitsumi, Izuku turns on his heel and makes to leave only to stop as her muttered voice reaches his enhanced hearing from several feet away. Shitty Deku, it's like a jolt through him. Sheesh, and to think he'd almost forgotten. Whipping back around, walking back over, he grabs Kitsumi by the hair again, yanking her up even as she yelps and struggles ineffectually against his hold. Sheesh, I was so occupied with making sure you didn't run away like a fucking coward that I forgot to take anything else for my win. Let's see. Well, let's start with the obvious. From now on, you don't get to call me Deku anymore, Kitsumi. I beat you. I beat you fair and square in this duel that you asked for. I am not weak. I am not useless. Do I make myself clear? Her eyes are filled with defiance at first as she grits her teeth and glares at him. But Izuku just glares right back at her and after a moment's thought activates one of his multitude of quirks. It's a simple aura of intimidation and a relatively weak one at that. But combined with everything else, from his demonstrable strength to the fact that he just knocked Kitsumi silly with one punch, it has a visible effect on the girl as her pupils dilate and her breathing becomes uneasy. Fine, Izuku smiles and then pauses before sniffing the air curiously. Wait, holy shit, was Kitsumi aroused? He quickly activates a scent-enhancing quirk and an analysis quirk and indeed, the girl before him, despite being beaten down, is getting off to some aspect of this. Was she getting off to him intimidating her into submission? Was she getting off on him blackmailing her into staying at UA with him? Was she just getting off to being beaten? This Izuku hadn't really intended to take liberties with his childhood bully or anything. But this changed things. Now he had a decision to make. Was he going to act on this new information or leave things as they were? There would be opportunities in the future, he had no doubt about that. Did he even want to give Kitsumi what she wanted, even if she would never admit it? Sheesh, now he was beginning to wonder if her destroying his clothing had had any ulterior motive to it besides her just trying to beat him. Why were things suddenly so much more complicated? Thanks for watching my video. See you next time, till then sayonara.